The alarms had been screaming for 2 hours before anyone important bothered to care. Deep inside Thesara Station, in the lower habitation rings where the refugees and lesser species lived, the environmental systems had failed. The heating grid collapsed first. Then the backup generators stuttered and died one by one, like candles blown out by a cold wind. Temperatures dropped fast. Within an hour, frost was forming on the walls. Within 2, children were shivering in corners, pressing their small bodies together for warmth that was running out. The upper rings, where the powerful alien delegations kept their embassies, sealed their doors. It was not their section. It was not their problem. The Velithi delegation locked down. The Selthari posted guards. The Korvathi embassy dimmed its lights and pretended no one was home. This was how the galaxy worked. You protected your own and ignored the rest. Ethan Voss did not get that message. He was a human cargo hauler, nothing special by any measure that mattered to the galaxy. He was 34 years old, had a bad knee from a loading accident 3 years back, and owned exactly one ship, a beat-up freighter called the Quiet Mercy. He had docked at Thesara 6 hours ago to sell thermal supplies and ration packs at the next port. That cargo was his income for the next 2 months. It was food on his table and fuel in his engines. He opened the cargo hold and started giving it all away. His co-pilot, a 4-armed Korvathi named Ren, stood at the top of the ramp and watched with all 4 hands on his hips. "You understand what you are doing?" Ren asked. His voice was flat, the way it always got when Ethan was about to do something financially suicidal. "People are cold, Ren. People are always cold somewhere. We need to eat. We will figure it out." Ethan grabbed a stack of thermal blankets and walked into the freezing corridor. "We always do." Ren cursed in 3 languages and followed him. The lower rings were a mess. Families from a dozen species huddled in hallways and common rooms. Some were species Ethan had never seen before, tall, thin beings with translucent skin, short furry creatures with too many eyes, a group of elderly insectoids clicking softly to each other in distress. None of them had expected help. When Ethan started handing out blankets and heating packs, they stared at him like he had lost his mind. He moved through the corridors for over an hour, handing out everything he had. Ren followed behind, grumbling but efficient, using his 4 arms to carry twice the load. They set up portable heaters in the worst areas. They passed out ration bars to anyone who looked hungry, which was everyone. Ethan was down to his last few blankets when he found the child. She was small, maybe 4 years old by human standards, though she was not human. She was Pelani, a fragile species with soft blue skin and wide dark eyes. She was sitting alone against a wall, her tiny body shaking so hard her teeth were clicking. No parents in sight. Maybe lost. Maybe worse. Ethan knelt down beside her. She flinched away from him. He did not reach for her. He just sat there close enough that she could feel he was warm and waited. After a long moment, her shaking hand reached out and touched his arm. His skin was warm. Humans ran hot compared to most species. She pressed closer. Ethan pulled off his own jacket, his only jacket, and wrapped it around her. It swallowed her whole. She looked up at him with those huge dark eyes, and something in her face changed. The fear left. She leaned into him and closed her eyes. He picked her up and carried her toward the nearest shelter point. He did not notice the tall figure watching from the shadows of a side corridor. Princess Kalith Vorshan had not planned to be in the lower rings. She was third-born heir to the Velithi Dominion, one of the oldest and most powerful empires in the galaxy. She had been assigned to Thesara Station as a diplomatic representative, which sounded important but was not. It was exile dressed in a pretty title. Her father, the Emperor, had sent her here because she was considered the least useful of his children. No military skill, no political cunning, no value. She had been wandering the station out of restless boredom when the alarm started. Instead of returning to her embassy like she was supposed to, she had gone down. She was not sure why. Curiosity, maybe, or something else she did not have a word for. She had watched the human for almost an hour. In Velithi culture, nothing was free. Every gift created a debt. Every act of kindness was a transaction with a price attached. This was not cruelty, it was simply how her people understood the universe. Resources were finite. Generosity without return was either foolishness or a trap. So what was this human doing? He was clearly not wealthy. His ship was old. His clothes were worn. The cargo he was giving away was obviously everything he had. And yet he moved through the freezing corridors with an easy calm, handing things to strangers of species he had never met, smiling at them, touching their shoulders gently, asking if they were okay. He asked for nothing. He wrote nothing down. He kept no record. When she saw him give his own jacket to the child, something shifted inside her chest. It was uncomfortable. She did not like it. She stepped out of the shadows and blocked his path. Ethan looked up at her. She was tall, almost 7 feet, with smooth, scaled skin the color of dark emeralds and eyes like molten gold. She wore simple clothes, but she carried herself like someone who had never been told no. He had no idea who she was. "What do you expect in return?" she asked. Her voice was sharp and clear. Ethan blinked. The Pelani child was asleep against his shoulder. He was exhausted, half frozen, and running on nothing but stubbornness. He looked at this intense alien woman asking him a question that, to her, was clearly the most important question in the world. He shrugged. Nothing. She was cold. Kalith stared at him. She searched his face for the lie, for the hidden angle, for the game. She found nothing. Just a tired man holding someone else's child in a freezing hallway because it was the right thing to do. She opened her mouth to say something. Nothing came out. She closed it again. Ethan shifted the child in his arms. "You look like you have some pull around here," he said, nodding toward the upper rings. "Any chance you could get someone to actually fix the heating?" Kalith stood very still for a long time. Then she turned and walked away without a word. 40 minutes later, the Velithi embassy opened its doors. Surplus heating units, medical supplies, and food reserves flowed into the lower rings. It was the first time a major galactic power had intervened in a refugee crisis on Thessara Station. Ever. Ambassador Drell Vasek, Kalith's political handler, watched the supplies leave the embassy with cold eyes. He had been assigned by her eldest brother to keep her quiet and irrelevant. This was not quiet. This was not irrelevant. He opened a secure channel to the throne world. "The princess has acted without authorization," he reported. "She appears to have been influenced by a human." There was a pause on the other end. "A human," the voice repeated as if tasting something unpleasant. "Watch her and watch him." Drell closed the channel and looked out at the corridors below, where a human cargo hauler with no jacket was still handing out blankets he could not afford. He did not understand it. None of them did, not yet. 3 days after the heating crisis, Kalith went looking for the human. She told herself it was research. The Velithi were scholars before they were conquerors, and understanding other species was simply good practice. The human had displayed behavior that did not fit any model she knew. He was a puzzle. She was solving him. That was all. She found him in a repair bay on the midring, lying on his back underneath his ship with grease on his face. His Korvathi co-pilot was sitting on a crate nearby, eating something from a foil packet and offering unhelpful advice. "The coupling is on the left," Ren said. "I know where the coupling is," Ethan said from under the ship. "Then why are you pulling on the right one?" "Because I am hoping it will feel sorry for me and fix itself." Kalith stood at the entrance and watched this exchange. She did not understand it. They were arguing, but neither of them seemed angry. There was something in their voices, a lightness she had no framework for. Ethan rolled out from under the ship and saw her. He sat up, wiped his hands on his pants, and smiled. It was the same easy, open smile he had given the refugees. No fear, no calculation, just warmth. "Hey," he said, "you are the one from the corridor, the one who got the embassy to help." "I did what was logical," Caliph said stiffly. "Well, logical or not, a lot of people are alive because of it, so thanks." He thanked her. A human, a member of a species the Velithi considered barely worth noticing, thanked a princess of the Dominion as if they were equals, as if she had done him a personal favor and he was genuinely grateful. Caliph did not know what to do with that, so she changed the subject. "Your cargo, you gave it all away. How will you survive?" Ethan shrugged. It was a gesture she was beginning to associate with him. Pick up a job somewhere. There is always freight that needs moving. You had resources. You gave them away to strangers, and now you have nothing. "I have a ship," Ethan said, "and a friend who complains a lot." He nodded toward Ren. "I complain the correct amount," Ren said without looking up. Caliph sat down on a crate across from Ethan. She had not been invited to sit. In Velithi culture, sitting without invitation was either an insult or a declaration of equality. She was not sure which one she meant. "I want to understand," she said. "Your species gives things away for nothing. Why?" Ethan thought about it, not in the quick, calculated way Velithi process questions, but slowly, honestly, as if he was really considering her question for the first time. "I guess because it feels right," he said. "Someone is hurting. You can help, so you help. You do not need a reason beyond that. But there is always a cost." "Sure, but the cost of not helping is worse. You just cannot always see it on a ledger." She came back the next day, and the day after that. It became a pattern. Caliph would appear at the repair bay or the station commons or whatever corridor Ethan happened to be in, and they would talk. At first, she asked questions like a scientist studying a specimen. She wanted data. She wanted rules. She wanted to map human behavior into categories she could understand. But humans, she discovered, did not fit into categories. Ethan told her stories. Not strategic briefings or intelligence reports, just stories. He told her about growing up on a farming colony, about his mother who sang while she worked, about his first time seeing open space through a cockpit window. He told her about a dog he had once owned, and when Caliph asked what a dog was, he spent 20 minutes explaining the concept of a pet, an animal you kept not for labor or food but simply because you loved it and it loved you back. Caliph found this deeply disturbing and strangely beautiful. He introduced her to human food. He cooked for her in the ship's tiny galley simple things, rice and vegetables, and a sauce he made from dried spices he kept in a jar. In Velithi culture, sharing food was a formal ritual loaded with political meaning. For Ethan, it was just Tuesday. "You are feeding me," Caliph said, staring at the plate he set in front of her. "You looked hungry. I am a princess of the Velithi Dominion. Princesses do not get hungry." She ate. It was the best meal she had ever had, and she could not explain why. The food was simple. The ship was small and cluttered, but no one was watching. No one was recording. No one was calculating what this meal meant for trade relations or political alliances. It was just two people eating together. Something inside her, something that had been locked away for a very long time, began to open. Meanwhile, the station was changing. Word of Ethan's actions during the crisis had spread. The refugees and smaller species delegations, the ones who were always ignored, always overlooked, started gravitating toward him, not as subjects to a leader, but as friends. He helped a Pelani family find better housing. He sat with an elderly insectoid merchant who was being cheated by a Selthari trader and, without raising his voice, talked the situation into a fair deal. He organized a communal meal in the lower ring commons, open to everyone, and species who had never shared a table found themselves passing food and trying to communicate through broken translations and hand gestures. The other alien species noticed something strange. Humans formed bonds quickly, deeply, and with almost anything. They did not seem to care about species or status or power. They just cared. And the truly terrifying part was that they meant it. There was no angle. There was no long game. Humans simply decided you were their friend, and then they would walk through fire for you. The Korvathi ambassador privately told his staff, "Do not let the humans befriend you. You will end up caring about things that are not strategically useful." It was too late. His own aide had already started joining the communal meals. One evening, sitting on the observation deck watching the stars drift past, Kalith told Ethan something she had never told anyone. "I was sent here because I am worthless," she said. The words came out flat and practiced, as if she had repeated them to herself so many times they had lost their edges. "My brother Vorath is a military commander. My sister Thessin is a political genius. I am the third child, the spare. My father sent me here to keep me out of the way." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Where I come from, the people who care the most are the ones worth the most." That is a foolish way to measure worth. Maybe, but I have been to a lot of places in this galaxy, and the ones that measure worth by power are usually the most miserable. Kalith looked at him. In the starlight, his face was calm and certain. He was not trying to flatter her. He was not trying to gain her favor. He simply believed what he said, and he said it because he thought she needed to hear it. She did not respond, but she did not leave either. They sat together in comfortable silence for a long time, watching the stars turn. She was starting to understand something that frightened her. The human concept of giving without expectation was not weakness. It was a kind of strength her people had never developed. It was a muscle the Velithi had never learned to use. And it was changing her. Far away in a private communication room, Ambassador Drell finished another encrypted report. His face was tight with concern. "The princess spends most of her free time with the human now," he told the screen. "She has begun making unauthorized decisions. She opened our supplies during the crisis. She has been attending gatherings organized by the lowering species. She is becoming popular." Prince Vorath's face filled the screen. He was larger than Kalith, heavier, with darker scales and eyes that held no warmth. "Popular," he repeated. "My little sister. The human appears to be the catalyst." Vorath leaned back. "A human, interesting. Let her play her little games. When the time comes, we will use this against her." He paused. "Keep watching, record everything, and make sure the human stays close to her. You want them together. I want evidence of her foolishness, and a human will provide plenty of it." Drell closed the channel and sat alone in the dark room. He had served the Velithi court for 40 years. He knew how this game was played. The princess was building something new and fragile, and she did not realize that her own family was sharpening the knife. He thought about the human, Ethan Voss, cooking simple meals in a small ship and giving blankets to strangers. For the first time in 40 years, Drell felt something he could not name. It might have been doubt. The Selthari warships arrived on a quiet morning. There were 12 of them, long and sharp like black thorns hanging in the void around Thessara Station. They did not fire. They did not need to. They simply positioned themselves across every supply route, every docking corridor, every lane that connected the station to the outside galaxy. Nothing in, nothing out. The Selthari conquered called it a trade adjustment. Everyone else called it what it was, a blockade. It was politics. The Selthari and the Velithi had been rivals for centuries, and the Selthari had chosen this moment to test the waters. By choking Thessara Station, they embarrassed the Velithi, who were supposed to be protecting it, and tested whether anyone in the Galactic Compact would actually do something. The answer, as always, was no. The major powers issued statements of concern and did nothing. The first week was uncomfortable. The second week was painful. By the third week, people were dying. The lower rings ran out of medical supplies first. Then food reserves dropped to emergency levels. The refugee populations, the ones who had already survived one crisis, started going hungry again. A Pelani elder died from a treatable infection because the medicine she needed was sitting in a cargo ship that could not get past the Selthari guns. 3 children from different species were hospitalized with malnutrition. Ethan watched it happen and felt something build inside his chest like a fire. He had been through hard times. He had been broke, stranded, and hungry more times than he could count. But he had never been good at watching other people suffer while he sat still. It was the one thing about himself he could not turn off, no matter how much easier life would be if he could. "We have to do something," he told Ren. Ren was running diagnostics on the Quiet Mercy's engines, which were held together by stubbornness and spare parts. "We," he said flatly, "you and me, against 12 Selthari warships." "I did not say it was a good plan." "You did not say a plan at all. You said we have to do something. That is not a plan, that is a feeling." "Fine, then help me make it a plan." They worked for 2 days straight. Ethan studied the Selthari formation, mapped the gaps in their sensor coverage, and calculated a route that a small, fast ship could thread if the pilot was either very skilled or very lucky. The Quiet Mercy was neither fast nor in great shape, but Ethan knew her like he knew his own hands. He knew what she could take and what she could give. But one ship was not enough. Even if he got through, one cargo hold of supplies would last the station maybe 4 days. So Ethan did something that no one in the galaxy expected. He opened a broadcast on the Human Communication Network, an informal, unregulated channel that connected independent human ships across the sector. No government authority, no military structure, just people. His message was simple: people are dying on Thessara Station. The blockade is killing them slowly. I am going to run it. I could use some help. He did not ask for volunteers. He did not offer payment. He did not invoke any authority or duty. He simply told the truth and trusted that it would be enough. Within 48 hours, 14 human ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel near Thessara Station. They were a mess. A retired military frigate with a crew of 4 retirees who should have been on a beach somewhere. A family-owned hauler from the outer colonies with cargo holds full of grain. 2 fast couriers that had dumped their paying contracts to come. A mining vessel that had no weapons but had armor thick enough to shrug off light fire. And half a dozen others, each one held together by duct tape, hope, and the particular human stubbornness that the galaxy had never learned to account for. None of them had been ordered, none of them had been paid, they just came. The Selthari commander stared at his tactical display and tried to understand what he was seeing. 15 human ships, most of them barely armed, none of them military, arranging themselves into something that loosely resembled a formation. They had no fleet authority, no government backing, no treaty obligation. There was no strategic reason for any of them to be here. "What are they doing?" his second officer asked. "I have no idea," the commander admitted. Ethan led the charge. The plan was not elegant. The mining vessel went first, its heavy hull soaking up fire while the smaller ships scattered in different directions, forcing the Selthari to split their attention. The couriers were fast enough to dodge, drawing pursuit ships away from the main lane. The family hauler went straight down the middle, loaded with food and medicine, while the Quiet Mercy flew escort. It was chaos, beautiful, terrifying, deeply human chaos. The Selthari fired warning shots, then real shots. A courier took a hit to its engine pod and spun wildly before its pilot corrected. The mining vessel's hull screamed as energy bolts splashed across its surface. One of the smaller ships lost its communications array and flew the rest of the run completely blind, following the ship in front of it on visual alone. Ethan pushed the Quiet Mercy harder than he ever had. Ren was in the co-pilot seat, all 4 hands flying across controls, rerouting power and patching systems as they failed. Alarms blared. The hull groaned. A piece of the port stabilizer tore off and cartwheeled into the void. "We are going to die," Ren announced. "Not today," Ethan said through gritted teeth. The family hauler made it through first, then the mining vessel trailing smoke, then the quiet Mercy shaking apart but still flying. One by one, the human ships pushed through the blockade and docked at Thesara Station. 3 ships were badly damaged. One had to be towed in by another. Every single one made it. On Thesara Station, the docking bay erupted. Refugees, diplomats, station workers, they all watched as battered human ships opened their cargo holds and supplies poured out. Food, medicine, heating fuel, blankets. One ship had brought nothing but children's toys because its captain, a grandmother from a farming colony, had decided that hungry children needed something to smile about too. In the station's command center, Caliph had watched the entire run. She had stood motionless in front of the tactical display, her golden eyes tracking every ship, every weapon's blast, every narrow miss. Her hands had gripped the railing so hard her claws left marks in the metal. She had felt something during those terrible minutes when the quiet Mercy was under fire, something so sharp and so deep that it stole her breath. The possibility that Ethan could die, that this strange, kind, impossible man could be erased from the universe by a Selthari energy bolt, had opened a door inside her that she could never close again. She understood now. She understood what he had been showing her all along. This was what it looked like when people cared without conditions. This was what the galaxy could be if anyone was brave enough to try. And she was not going to let it fail. Caliph straightened, turned to Ambassador Drell and spoke in the cold, formal tone of Velithi royal authority. Open a channel to the Selthari commander. Broadcast on all frequencies. Drell hesitated. Your Highness, you do not have authorization to. I am invoking my birthright as a daughter of the Velithi throne. Thesara Station is now under the formal protection of the Velithi Dominion. Any further hostile action against this station or anyone docked here will be treated as an act of war against the Dominion itself. The command center went silent. Every officer, every diplomat, every aide stared at her. What she had just done was enormous. She had committed the entire might of the Velithi Dominion to defending a station full of refugees and minor species, something no Velithi royal had ever done. It would infuriate her family. It would make her a target. It could destroy her. She did not care. The Selthari commander received the broadcast, did the math, and ordered his ships to withdraw. Fighting humans was confusing. Fighting the Velithi Dominion was suicide. The blockade was over. An hour later, Ethan limped the quiet Mercy into her docking berth. The ship was wrecked, hull scarred, stabilizer gone, half the systems offline. But she was in one piece, and so was her crew. Ethan walked down the boarding ramp, exhausted and bruised, with a cut above his eye that he had not bothered to treat. Ren was behind him, muttering about repair costs. Caliph was waiting at the airlock. She stood perfectly still as he approached. The docking bay was full of people, refugees, station workers, the crews of the other human ships. Everyone was watching. Caliph did not care about any of them. Ethan stopped in front of her. He opened his mouth to say something, probably something light and self-deprecating, because that was what he always did. She stepped forward and pressed her forehead against his. The docking bay went completely silent. In Velithi culture, the forehead touch was the most intimate gesture that existed. It was not romantic in the way humans understood romance. It was deeper than that. It meant, I trust you with my life. I see you completely. You are part of me now. A princess of the Velithi Dominion had just bonded herself to a human cargo hauler in front of the entire station. Ethan did not know the full meaning of what had just happened, but he felt it. He closed his eyes and leaned into her, and for a moment the whole noisy, broken, beautiful galaxy was perfectly still. Behind them, Ren watched with all 4 arms crossed. Well, he said quietly, that is going to complicate things. He was right. The summons arrived on a cold, formal channel. The the kind the Velithi used when they wanted you to feel small before you even opened the message. Princess Kalith Vorshan was ordered to return to the throne world immediately. She was to answer for her unauthorized invocation of royal authority, her commitment of Dominion military protection to a minor station, and her public association with a member of an inferior species. The word inferior was used 3 times in the message. Ethan counted. "You are not coming with me," Kalith said. They were standing in the quiet Mercy's galley, where so many of their conversations had happened over simple meals and warm drinks. "Yes, I am," Ethan said. "My family will destroy you. You do not understand what the court is. It is not a place for honest people." "Then it sounds like it needs one." Ren, who was replacing a power coupling in the next room, leaned through the doorway. "I want it noted that I think this is the worst idea you have ever had, and you once tried to arm wrestle a Gorvathi dock worker." "Noted," Ethan said. "I also want it noted that I am coming too, because someone has to fly the ship home after they kill you." The Velithi throne world was called Vorshan, and it was everything Ethan had imagined and worse. The planet was ancient and beautiful, towering spires of dark crystal, gardens that stretched for miles, skis stained purple by twin suns. Everything was designed to make you feel insignificant. The architecture was too tall. The corridors were too long. The silence was too heavy. The court itself was held in the Hall of Ascension, a vast chamber carved from a single piece of black stone. Hundreds of Velithi nobles filled the tiered galleries, their scales gleaming in shades of emerald, obsidian, and deep crimson. They moved like predators even when standing still. Every glance was a measurement. Every whisper was a blade. Ethan, in his worn cargo hauler's clothes, stood at the center of this chamber and felt exactly as out of place as they wanted him to feel. Prince Voreth Vorshan presided from an elevated platform. He was massive, a full head taller than Kalith, with scales so dark they were almost black and eyes that reflected light like polished stone. He had the careful stillness of someone who had never needed to raise his voice because everyone already feared him. "Sister," Voreth said, and the word carried no affection. "You have been busy." Kalith stood before the court with her back straight and her expression composed. She had changed since Thessara. Something in her had hardened, not into cruelty, into resolve. "I did what was necessary," she said. "You committed the resources of the Dominion to protect vermin and refugees. You invoked royal authority without approval. And you," his eyes moved to Ethan with the slow precision of a weapon tracking its target, "you brought a human to the throne world." Murmurs rolled through the galleries like distant thunder. Voreth raised a hand for silence. "I have convened a trial of worth, as is my right as first heir. This trial will determine whether your judgment has been compromised by outside influence and whether you remain fit to carry the Vorshan name." Kalith's jaw tightened. A trial of worth was an ancient legal mechanism, rarely used, designed to strip a royal of their titles and standing. The judges were selected by the one who called the trial. The outcome was almost always decided before it began. The trial lasted 3 hours. Witnesses were called, Velithi diplomats from Thessara who testified that Kalith had acted recklessly. Military analysts who argued her protection order had weakened the Dominion's strategic position. Cultural advisors who described human influence as a contamination, a softening of Velithi values. Kalith defended herself with calm precision, but the court was not interested in her arguments. The judges, 3 elder nobles, all loyal to Vorath, listened with faces that had already made their decision. Ethan watched from the side of the chamber, his hands clenched at his sides. He had sat through the entire trial in silence, as custom demanded. Non-Velithi had no voice in court proceedings. He was decoration, a prop in Voreth's theater. But Ethan had spent 2 months on Thessara Station learning how the galaxy worked. He had mediated disputes between species who had no reason to trust each other. He had read everything he could find about Velithi law and culture, because Calith mattered to him, and understanding her world was part of understanding her. And he had found something interesting. When the lead judge called for final statements, Ethan stepped forward. The chamber went rigid with shock. A human speaking in the Hall of Ascension. Several nobles rose from their seats. Guards shifted toward him. Under Article 17 of the Galactic Compact's Diplomatic Recognition Charter, Ethan said, his voice steady and clear in the vast chamber, any citizen of a recognized species may speak as champion for an individual facing judgment before a foreign court, provided they have a personal bond with the accused and accept full responsibility for the consequences. Silence, complete ringing silence. Voreth's eyes narrowed. He looked to his legal advisors. They conferred in hurried whispers. One of them looked up with an expression that Ethan recognized, the look of someone who had just found a crack in their own wall. "The clause is valid," the advisor said reluctantly. Voreth's composure did not break, but something behind his eyes shifted. "Let the human speak, then. Let us hear what wisdom a cargo hauler brings to the Hall of Ascension." Ethan walked to the center of the chamber. He stood where Calith had stood, surrounded by hundreds of beings who considered him barely worth noticing. He was tired, underdressed, and completely out of his depth. He spoke anyway. "I am not going to argue law," he said. "I do not know your laws well enough, and you would not listen anyway. Your minds are already made up about the legal questions, so I am going to tell you something else instead." He paused. The chamber was so quiet he could hear the hum of the lighting above. 3 weeks before the blockade, a little girl almost froze to death on Thessara Station. She was Pelani, 4 years old maybe. She was sitting alone in a hallway because the station's heating had failed and nobody who had the power to help cared enough to try. I gave her my jacket. That was all. A jacket. It cost me nothing that mattered. He looked around the chamber. "Your princess saw me do that, and instead of walking past like everyone else, she stopped. She asked me why I did it, and when I told her it was because the girl was cold, something changed in her. Not because I did anything special. I am not special. I am a man with a bad ship and a loud co-pilot. What changed was that she realized she had always wanted to help people and had been told her whole life that wanting that made her weak." His voice did not rise. It did not need to. "Calith opened your embassy supplies that night and saved lives. She did not do it because I told her to. She did it because she is a good person, and for the first time she was in a place where being good was not treated as a failure." He looked at Voreth. "You call that compromised judgment. I call it the best judgment anyone in your dominion has shown in a long time." The silence that followed was different from before. It was not shocked silence. It was the silence of people reconsidering something they thought they already knew. Ethan continued. 14 human ships ran your blockade. Nobody ordered them. Nobody paid them. They came because someone told them people were dying and they decided that was enough reason to risk their lives. You find that confusing. I know you do. Your culture says that nothing is free, that every act has a price. But those pilots did not want a price. They wanted to help. And your princess understood that, and she stood up when no one else would, and she ended a blockade with nothing but her voice and her courage. He turned to the judges. "You are going to decide today whether caring about strangers makes someone unfit to lead. I think you already know the answer. I think you have always known. I think some of you wish you had the courage to say it." He stepped back. He had nothing else to say. The chamber buzzed. Not with outrage, with uncertainty. Several of the nobles in the galleries were speaking quietly to each other with expressions that looked troubled. One of the judges was staring at his own hands. Voreth saw the shift and moved to stop it. He stood, towering over the chamber, and spoke in a voice like grinding stone. "A touching performance, but the Dominion is not governed by sentiment. It is governed by strength. And if my sister cannot see that her attachment to this human has clouded her mind, then perhaps the human himself should consider how fragile his position truly is. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Kalith had been standing motionless throughout Ethan's speech. Her face had been unreadable, but her eyes had not left him. She had watched this simple, brave, impossible man stand before the most dangerous room in the galaxy and speak the truth as if it were the easiest thing in the world. She understood now with absolute clarity what she wanted, what she had always wanted. She stepped forward. Her voice rang through the Hall of Ascension like a bell struck in an empty cathedral. I declare Ethan Voss my chosen. The chamber erupted. The Velithi choosing was the most sacred bond in their culture. It was absolute, irrevocable, and eternal. To declare someone your chosen was to bind your life to theirs completely. Any attack on a chosen was an attack on the one who chose them. Any dishonor to one was dishonor to both. A princess of the Velithi dominion had just made a human cargo hauler untouchable. Voreth stood perfectly still. His claws dug into the stone railing of his platform. He could not strike at Ethan now without striking at Kalith, and striking at a royal who had just invoked the choosing in the Hall of Ascension would turn every traditionalist in the Dominion against him. He had been outplayed, not by strategy, not by cunning, but by sincerity so absolute that his entire political framework had no defense against it. The lead judge, his voice shaking slightly, declared the trial of worth concluded. No ruling against Kalith was issued. The judges could not bring themselves to condemn someone who had just performed the most sacred act in their culture. Voreth left the chamber without a word. The threat had not left his eyes, but it had been caged, at least for now. In the corridor outside, Ethan leaned against a wall and let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for hours. His hands were shaking. Kalith stood in front of him. For the first time since he had known her, she looked uncertain. "Do you understand what I did?" she asked quietly. "You saved my life. I bound my life to yours, forever, in front of the entire court. Ethan, this is not something that can be undone." He looked at her, this tall, fierce, brilliant woman who had been told her whole life she was not enough, who had watched a stranger give away his jacket and decided to change the world. "Good," he said, "I do not want it undone." She stared at him. Then slowly she pressed her forehead against his again. This time she was smiling. Down the corridor, Ren watched with all four arms folded. "I am going to need a bigger ship," he muttered, "and a raise." Nobody offered him one. 6 months had passed since the trial, and the Velithi throne world was becoming unrecognizable. It started small, the way all of Ethan's changes did. A free medical clinic in the lower districts of the capital city, staffed by Velithi physicians who had volunteered, a concept so alien to their culture that the word for volunteer had to be borrowed from the human language. Then a community kitchen, open to anyone, where meals were served without charge and without requiring identification. Then a school for children of mixed-species families, the first of its kind on a Velithi world. The nobility was horrified. The common people were transformed. Ethan had not planned any of it. He had simply started doing things the way he always did, seeing a problem, finding a way to help, and trusting that other people would join in once they saw it was possible. He had spent his first month on the throne world just walking the streets of the capital, talking to people, learning how they lived. The lower districts were crowded and neglected. Services were poor. The gap between the crystal spires of the noble quarter and the cramped housing blocks below was vast and largely invisible to anyone who lived above it. So Ethan made it visible. He did not give speeches. He did not challenge the political system. He just started helping, and he did it publicly, and the Velithi people, who had been taught their entire lives that generosity was weakness, watched a human work himself to the bone for strangers and began to wonder if maybe they had been taught wrong. Kalith worked beside him. The princess, who had been dismissed as worthless by her own family, had become the most talked-about figure in the Dominion. News of the trial had spread far beyond the throne world. The story was irresistible, a princess defying her powerful brother, bonding herself to an alien who had shown her a different way to live. The common Velithi loved it. Street artists painted murals of the forehead touch in the docking bay. Musicians wrote songs about the blockade run. Children played games where they pretended to be human cargo pilots flying through enemy fire. Voreth watched all of this from his military compound with cold fury, but he could not move against his sister. The choosing had made her untouchable, and her growing popularity among the common people had made her politically dangerous. For the first time in his life, the first prince of the Velithi Dominion was afraid of his little sister. The emperor, meanwhile, said nothing. He observed from his palace at the top of the highest spire, ancient and patient, and kept his thoughts to himself. Across the galaxy, the story had spread even further. The Galactic Compact had never seen anything quite like it. A human, a single, ordinary human, had shifted the politics of one of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations through nothing but kindness and the stubborn refusal to stop caring. Other species started paying attention to humans in a way they never had before. The Korvathi ambassador, who had warned his staff not to befriend humans, found himself attending one of Ethan's community meals and staying for 3 hours. The Pelani delegation sent a formal message of gratitude that was 17 pages long. Even the Selthari, who had been embarrassed by the blockade, began quietly requesting human mediators for their trade disputes because the humans are the only ones everyone trusts. Humanity had not conquered anything. They had not won any wars or seized any territory. They had simply been themselves, warm, stubborn, ridiculously generous, and the galaxy was rearranging itself around them like water finding a new path. It was around this time that the xenobiologists got involved. The leading scientific minds of the Dominion had always maintained that cross-species reproduction between Velithi and humans was biologically impossible. The genetic structures were too different, the biochemistry too incompatible. It was settled science, and no one questioned it. They were wrong. What the scientists had failed to account for was the Velithi bonding response. Deep in Velithi biology, buried beneath centuries of political evolution and cultural repression, was an ancient mechanism tied to emotional connection. The Velithi had once been a deeply communal species, and their reproductive biology still carried traces of that past. Profound emotional bonding, the kind that the modern Velithi court had all but eliminated through centuries of political marriages and strategic breeding, triggered biochemical changes that could, under extraordinary circumstances, bridge biological gaps that should have been unbridgeable. The choosing between Caliph and Ethan was not just a cultural ritual. It was the deepest emotional bond two beings could share, and it had activated something in Caliph's biology that no one had seen in generations. The palace physician discovered it during a routine examination and nearly dropped her instruments. Caliph was expecting. She told Ethan in their quarters that evening. He was sitting at a small table he had built himself. Velithi furniture was too tall for him, and he had gotten tired of eating with his chin at plate level. He was reading a report about expanding the clinic network to other cities. "Ethan," she said from the doorway. Her voice was strange, not her usual composed tone, but something softer, something new. He looked up. She was standing with one hand resting on her stomach. Her golden eyes were bright in a way he had never seen before. He understood before she said it. Humans were good at reading people. It was one of their gifts. "Are you serious?" he whispered. The physician confirmed it this morning. "They do not understand how it is possible. They are calling it unprecedented." A pause. "I am told the word in your language is miracle." Ethan stood up. His chair fell over behind him. He crossed the room and took her hands, and she let him, and for a long moment they just stood there, holding onto each other. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Terrified," he said, and then he laughed, and she felt the sound in her chest like sunlight. "Also the happiest I have ever been. I think those two things can exist at the same time." "That is very human of you." "Guilty." The announcement shook the galaxy. The first human Velithi child. The first cross-species heir to a major galactic power. The implications rippled outward in every direction. Political analysts scrambled to predict what it meant for succession, for diplomacy, for the balance of power. Xenobiologists published papers so fast they tripped over each other. News networks across 100 star systems ran the story continuously. Vorath demanded an emergency session of the court. He argued that the child could not be considered a legitimate heir, that it was an abomination, that it proved Caliph had been compromised beyond recovery. He spoke with force and conviction, and the full weight of military authority behind him. He lost. The common people of the Dominion had already decided. Caliph was theirs. The story was theirs. The child that was coming belonged to all of them, a symbol of something new, something that the old ways had never been able to produce. Vorath's allies in the court, sensing the shift, began quietly distancing themselves from him. Power was changing hands, not through war or conspiracy, but through a tide of popular feeling that no one had predicted and no one could stop. The emperor summoned Ethan to his private chambers. The old ruler was smaller than Ethan had expected. Age had shrunk him, though his scales still held a deep, rich green and his eyes were sharp as ever. He sat in a simple chair, not a throne, just a chair in a room filled with books and star maps and the quiet weight of centuries. "Sit," the emperor said. Ethan sat. They looked at each other for a long time. The emperor studied him the way Caliph had once studied him, searching for the angle, the motive, the hidden agenda. Then the emperor asked the question. The same question his daughter had asked in a freezing corridor on a broken space station, the question that had started everything. "What do you expect in return?" Ethan met the old ruler's eyes. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, a blanket given to a cold child, a meal shared with a lonely princess, a fleet of battered ships flying into fire because someone said people were dying. He thought about Caliph, about the life growing inside her, about the clinics and the kitchens and the children playing blockade runner in the streets. "Nothing," Ethan said. "I just love her." The emperor of the Velithi Dominion, ruler of 1,000 worlds, conqueror of star systems, keeper of an empire that had endured for 10,000 years, sat in his chair and laughed. It was a real laugh, rusty and surprised, as if it had been locked away for decades and had finally broken free. "My advisors told me humans were simple creatures," the emperor said. "I am beginning to think your species is the most complicated thing this galaxy has ever produced." "We get that a lot," Ethan said. The emperor leaned forward. "Take care of my daughter. Take care of that child. And for the sake of everything I have built," he paused, and something in his ancient eyes softened, "do not stop being what you are." "I was not planning to." That evening, Ethan sat on the balcony of their quarters, watching the twin suns of Vorshan sink toward the horizon. The sky turned colors that did not exist on Earth, deep violet bleeding into gold bleeding into a red so rich it looked like the universe was blushing. Caliph sat beside him, leaning against his shoulder. His hand rested on her stomach, and he could feel the faintest flutter of warmth beneath his palm. New life, impossible life, life that existed because two people from different worlds had decided that kindness was not weakness and love was not a transaction. His communicator buzzed. He picked it up. "Ethan," Ren's voice, crackling across the stars from wherever he had parked the quiet Mercy. "The port stabilizer is acting up again. The water recycler is making a noise that I am fairly sure is not supposed to happen, and I just got a bill for docking fees that made me physically ill. When exactly is your vacation ending?" Ethan grinned. "Might be a while, Ren." You said that 6 months ago. And I was right then, too. A long pause, then quieter, congratulations, both of you, I mean it. Thanks, Ren. I still want a raise. Good night, Ren. He set the communicator down and looked out at the city below. In the lower districts, lights were coming on in the community kitchen. He could see people moving inside, Velithi, Pelani, Korvathi, and others, sharing a meal together. Near the entrance, a Velithi child handed a piece of bread to a stranger and asked for nothing in return. The stranger looked confused, then grateful, then something else, something that looked like the beginning of understanding. It was a small gesture, the smallest thing in the world. But Ethan knew better than anyone how far a small gesture could travel. Kalith shifted against him. What are you thinking about? She murmured. He kissed the top of her head, between the smooth ridges of her scales, in the spot that always made her close her eyes. Blankets, he said. And it all started with a blanket.